You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome to the Health Hub on Radio Maria Canada, exploring cutting-edge health and wellness information and therapies, helping you to take your health to the next level. I'm your host, Kathy Biasi, and I'm an holistic nutritionist and a professional cancer coach. Up until recently, medical genetic testing has been accessible only in the medical space. But now a new company, Panacea, is opening up the world of genetic testing to individuals as a home test. Today, we will be talking about the power of genetic testing and how we can use it to navigate our health management. Our guest is Dahlia Attia-King, and she is the founder and CEO of Panacea and has a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Chemistry from the University of Miami. Dahlia's experience working for genetic laboratories exposed her to the reality that very few patients were able to access valuable preventative clinical genetic tests. With an additional 6 years in healthcare IT, Dahlia learned about the technology solutions integral in pushing healthcare into a much-needed era of modernization. After embarking on a multi-year journey to unravel the reasons for genetic testing underutilization, she met Dr. Hinco Gierman, and they were inspired to create a solution. Panacea was founded with a mission to improve access to clinical genetic testing so that people can get in control of their health and prevent disease. Panacea now offers residents of almost all states the ability to access at-home clinical genetic testing with whole exome sequencing, empowering people to potentially save their own lives. It's a very informative show today. We talk about what medical genetic testing actually is and how this differs from tests like 23andMe. The next question, and it's something that I think about a lot, is what do you do with these results when you get them? So I have my genetic testing results. What can I do with them? And what are the limits of genetic testing? Very interesting show. It's very up and coming, this area of genetic testing. And now that we have a company that is putting it into the hands of individuals, this will just create more and more questioning about the power of genetic testing. Stay tuned with us. We will be back in just a few minutes to talk to Dahlia.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back to the Health Hub. Today's show has been recorded, no opportunity for calling in, but please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on those locations. Dahlia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's an honor to be here.
So you're definitely on what I would call the cutting edge of testing. Medical testing in all ways, shapes, and forms is becoming much more integrated, where we have not just the doctors ordering tests, but patients themselves, civilians being able to go online and ordering certain testing that they can get done in the comfort of their own home, which I think is wonderful. We are going to talk about where that might fall into bad territory when it comes to interpretation. But when it comes to what you're doing to genetic testing, this is quite new outside of the medical space or, the heritage DNA testing or whatever you call that.
Ancestry, yeah.
Ancestry, thank you. How did you get into, coming to be so passionate about the ways and uses and creations of genetic testing?
Yeah, so great place to start. As you mentioned, there is this booming movement, this booming direct-to-consumer movement of medical products and services that are becoming a lot more accessible to the consumer, right? Directly to the user of the
Yeah.
product and service. And the interesting thing is that this is really a kind of a new territory because these products and services are deep medical tests and services. You're talking about clinical genetic testing, which is what we do. You're talking about preventative MRIs. You're talking about a lot of clinical testing that is kind of transitioning out of being, utilized in the traditional clinical setting, and now being made available directly to consumers, hopefully with the proper guidance, right? These things still need the guidance of experts like doctors and counselors, et cetera, to really guide the user. But you're absolutely right. There's this booming space of direct-to-consumer healthcare services, and this really puts the user in a lot more control of their health, which I think is really, really fantastic. In regards to myself, I actually wanted to be a doctor. I was applying to medical school when I started working for a small group of genetic laboratories. And genetics always fascinated me. It was a huge part of my education. And I knew obviously it's the future of medicine. So as a doctor, it'd be a great thing to be exposed to. And when I started working for these genetic laboratories, I really learned more about this incredible revolutionary technology called next-gen sequencing. And next-gen sequencing is essentially the technology that reads the DNA of an individual. And with that information, so many things about an individual's health could be revealed. And that information could be really useful in preventing problems before they even exist, before they even occur, right? So that's kind of a new territory in medicine, right? Like for preventative care. The problem that I discovered very quickly was that this incredible technology and this incredible test was almost completely inaccessible by people. And the two reasons that we sort of, ended up finding out were the cause of this inaccessibility ended up being, unfortunately, the lack of very wide insurance coverage for this type of testing. That obviously inhibited a lot of people being able to get this test funded and covered by their insurer. And secondly, doctors in general were really hesitant to order a test that wasn't covered by a patient's insurance company. And so doctors really weren't that excited about prescribing this test for people. So when you have the two biggest decision makers in healthcare, your insurance companies and your doctors, not necessarily on board with a test, nobody's going to get this test. And so I decided that this is a problem that needs solving. And of course, at the time, I was a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, optimistic, 10-year younger girl. And I figured I have to solve this. I have to figure out how to solve it. And it took a very long time, lots of trial and error, lots of learning, lots of research, to ultimately come up with a solution that might be effective in solving the accessibility and cost problem that exists in the space. And here I am today, the founder of Panacea, essentially creating a direct-to-consumer medical genetic testing company.
Well, congratulations. Really,
Thank
that's
you.
wonderful.
Thank you so much.
I think probably for most of us, when it comes to genetic testing, we think of 23andMe, or we think of post-disease testing that's done in the hospital. So for instance, on a personal note, after I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I got genetic testing done to see if I had any genes that possibly I could be passing on.
Sure.
And it was, they're two very, very different things. What I felt with my testing was that I would get the results and not know what to do with them. So if I did, in fact, have something that I could pass along or that would put me at higher risk, it was the information handed to me. And at that point, years ago, it almost put fear in me, because if I got this
Sure.
information, what do I do with it? if I don't
Sure.
have actionable steps, that can be a frightening space.
Totally.
I do definitely want to circle back to this very point because I think it's key for what you're trying to do and accomplish and where we need to open people's eyes. But what is the difference between, now you have, it's called whole exome sequencing. So if you could explain that and tell us what the difference is between, the home, 23andMe testing and what you are doing.
Sure. So this is probably the biggest takeaway I would hope people can kind of take away from this conversation between you and I. Not all tests are the same. Not all genetic tests are the same. There's actually several types of tests, but in general, there's two pretty broad categories of genetic tests. There's the very common direct-to-consumer tests that we see everywhere, right? The ancestry tests, even food sensitivity testing that is genetic testing. There's genetic testing that can help you identify your sleep patterns and how you might metabolize certain foods. There's kind of that, like, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but a surface level type of genetic testing that's very common direct to consumer today. The second type of genetic test is a much deeper, more comprehensive type of genetic test that really deeply reviews your genetic makeup. And the goal of that test is to kind of reveal where your disease risks might lie, right? That is typically clinical medical genetic testing. Now, the biggest differentiator between these two types of genetic test categories is the technology that's typically used, right? The direct-to-consumer tests use microarray testing, and that's essentially a search for a very specific combination of a gene. It is not an actual reading of an individual's entire genome or even the entire gene itself. It's a very specific search and find. So there's a specific combination that could lead to a trait, and therefore you're only looking for that. If you don't find it, then the results essentially are negative. The patient doesn't have this particular genetic combination. It's a very affordable and fast and cheap technology. And that's why a lot of these tests are, $100, couple $100, sometimes under $100, right? But again, they're only searching for something specific and they're not doing a comprehensive review. And even if they are looking for a specific gene that may increase your risk for a certain disease, they're only looking for one combination of that gene, or they're looking at very few genes. And so it is a very surface level review, not a deep comprehensive review. When it comes to clinical genetic testing, that second major category, the type of technology that's used is typically next-gen sequencing. Next-gen sequencing is an actual reading of every single genetic letter in your gene or even in your whole genome. It's very comparable to me saying, Kathy, read me this book, but don't read me every word of the book. Read me every single letter of every single word in the book. So it's a very thorough, deep reading and review of an individual's genes. And it ideally misses almost nothing. It is not a search and find and everything else is ignored. It is a deep, comprehensive review. And that is super powerful because when you don't necessarily know what you're looking for, when you're sort of maybe thinking someone might have a risk for a disease, but you don't necessarily know what disease or what their risks might be, looking at everything will really help you identify all the risks that individual might be carrying in their genes. So that's kind of the difference. Does that make sense? Do I need to clarify anything specific about those two genetic test categories?
No, it makes sense. It just opens the window for me for, more and more questioning.
Yeah, of course.
You can't possibly be testing for every disease out there. So, maybe it's my mind not working properly. with the testing, for instance, that I did, they were looking for specific mutations in my genetic makeup that could lead me to a further cancer diagnosis. When someone is doing a for health preventative test of yours, is there an indication of what they would like you to look for? Like, how do you possibly throw back any sort of genetic mutation or genetic risk? It just seems astronomically large.
So that's a good point. So let's dive in a little deeper into that. So first of all, genetic testing is only as I suppose as effective as our scientific knowledge of genetics in general, right? We still are barely scratching the surface on fully understanding our genetics and how they play a role in my health, in our health, not just my health, our health. And what precisely are they doing, right? So from what we understand from science, we can essentially use that to sort of we can use that to really take a genetic test and understand where somebody's specific risks might lie. But to your point, there are areas in which might be indicated, right? Like for you, for example, you had breast cancer. And so your doctors, I imagine, ordered you a panel test, which is a pre-selected number of genes that are known by science to play an active role in breast cancer. They looked at those genes. Maybe those were 10 genes, maybe they were 200 genes. I'm not quite sure exactly, what panel you received, but panels vary in that number. And those genes were screened fully. They were sequenced, likely by next-gen sequencing, because again, this is a medical test. And they were looking for any types of mutations that might have led to your cancer or potentially might lead to other types of inherited cancers, right? So that's a very specific approach. When it comes to preventative testing, and there might not be any indications, there might not be any family history of disease or might not even be a personal history of disease, you're really casting a wide net. You don't know what you're looking for. And so this is where whole exome sequencing and whole genome sequencing really comes in handy, because when you're doing whole exome sequencing, you're essentially sequencing every single gene, 20,000 plus genes. And when you do that, you really are, it's not a targeted search, it's a broad search. But once your genes are completely sequenced, the big job really becomes interpreting your genetic makeup, right? So the machines sequence your genes, they read your genes, and then all that information goes into these really sophisticated bioinformatics platforms and software. And those systems, of course, are programmed to understand the latest research and the latest developments in science that could pertain to your genes. And then, of course, that information is reviewed by experts like geneticists. And then your report is produced, right? And that report will essentially highlight any combinations or any mutations that were found in your genetic makeup that we understand by science today to cause or potentially increase a risk for a disease. So there's
Dahlia, can I just
steps.
jump in here and ask you a question?
Sure.
I
yeah.
am not a biologist. I have no idea about any of this stuff. I'm not a chemist.
Sure.
When you're testing and you're looking at the genes, is part of what you're doing actually looking that the gene itself is the way it should be formed?
Yeah, so there's a baseline, there's an average combination, right? A wild type combination, basically a combination of the gene that most people will have that that has been understood by science to not necessarily increase a risk for a certain problem or to function normally, right? There's a baseline. When you are sequencing somebody's gene, you're essentially comparing their sequence to the average. And if there is an anomaly or a mutation or a change in that individual, that kind of raises a red flag. What is this change? Is this change harmful? Is it totally benign? Or is it beneficial? In very minor cases, it could be a beneficial change. So yes, you are definitely comparing everybody's genome or gene that is being sequenced to an average
Okay.
combination that is most common in people.
Perhaps what we should have started off with, in just in very layman's terms, what is the function of a gene?
That's a good question. So a gene essentially is a packet of information. It is a biological instruction that tells the body to do something. So it is comparable to a paragraph in a chapter of a book. It's sort of a cohesive thought, and it sort of tells a part of the story, right? It gives some sort of instruction to the body to create something, to do something.
Okay.
Now, there are more than just genes in your genome. There's genes, which are specific packets of information or instruction. And then there's little spaces in between the genes that historically have been called junk DNA because they don't actually specifically tell the body to do something the way that a gene does. But we really just haven't fully scratched the surface on exactly what those spaces are doing. They're supportive of the genes. They're kind of like genetic scaffolding, if you will. When you're building a building, you have those metal scaffolding braces around the building to help support the building, but they're not actually part of the building.
Why does that sound like fascia? The fascia of the
Yes.
body that nobody thought had any benefit until.
Right. So in a way, that's what those spaces in between the genes do. They're genetic information, it's DNA, but it's not necessarily being translated by the body to do something specific.
And do we have a known finite number of genes, or is science finding new genes?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I'm probably not the right person to ask about that since I'm not a geneticist myself. But from what I understand, the number is roughly 20,000 genes. I've also heard something closer to 18,000. I've heard something a little closer to 22,000. So we're kind of in that ballpark. And I imagine there are discoveries being made all the time. But that's kind of where we sit right now in that 20,000 gene range, which is actually substantially less than we thought it would be. Before we sequenced the human genome, before we completed the Human Genome Project, I think, estimates were in the hundreds of thousands. And I think at some point even there were estimates that humans would have millions of genes, but that's just simply not the case. It's much, much less than that, which actually raises an interesting question, right? Which is, okay, great, we're these sophisticated, creatures, and we're capable of doing all these biological things, yet we have a much smaller number of genes anticipated. So the theory then is that each gene is probably a lot more responsible for biological function than we understand. That what genes are doing, what the individual genes are doing, is probably a lot more complex and intertwined than we realize, since there's so few of them. But we're digressing into deep biology here.
Yes.
But yeah, so it's fascinating area, and frankly, we really are just scratching the surface on it. There's so much still we need to learn about it. But again, I'm not sure if I answered the original question, and of course, I keep babbling, so I even forgot.
No, that's good. But the question then that pops up, but just before we go to break here, can we impact our gene makeup? Or is it is what it is, and we have to pivot from the information that we get? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, can we manipulate our genes and change them, or the genes are the genes and that's it, and we have to figure out moving forward once we have the information?
Yeah, sure. So do you want me to go into that now, or are we going to go into that after?
Is that a long answer?
Probably.
Okay, well then let's take a break now, and we'll come back and we'll start off with that question.
Awesome.
Okay, everybody, we'll be right back.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back to the Health Hub, everybody. Our guest is Dahlia Attia-King. We're going to continue on. I had to stop you. I apologize for cutting you off there. But can we impact our gene makeup? Like, and what I'm talking about specifically, can we alter the actual gene, or is our impact with the knowledge that we have of a systemic, both inherent and external impact on our genes? So what am I saying? Can we functionally change the actual structure of the gene, or do we have to play around with other issues to show how they're expressed?
Yeah. So one thing I always like to say is, and this is probably odd for the founder of a genetics company, but the bottom line is your genes are not your destiny. And the reason I say that today is because if you are able to understand the risks that might be held in your genes through a genetic test, you can essentially get ahead of those risks by utilizing medical interventions that are available today. In the future, we likely will very much be able to literally edit the gene, right? When we talk about CRISPR technology and gene editing, that's essentially the goal, is to take a faulty gene, change it up, fix it up, and make it faulty no more. That is not something that is available today in standard healthcare. There are obviously there's a lot of research that's going into it. There are some therapeutics that are being tested and some that have shown a lot of success in gene editing. But as of standardized care in medicine, that's not something that we can do today. But what we can do today, and why genetic testing is so valuable, is essentially understand your risks and then do certain things, take certain actions and behaviors to minimize those risks, and in some cases completely eliminate those risks. So here's an example. Let's say you have a gene that increases your risk for colon cancer. The best thing to do is to start screening the colon, right, via colonoscopy at much earlier ages than recommended by the healthcare societies, because you have an elevated risk. The good news with that is if you were to get a colonoscopy before a cancer occurs, or if a cancer is occurring in very early stages, you will have the best shot at combating that cancer, or potentially stopping it from happening in the first place. Polyps in the colon can develop into cancers. And so if you have some polyps in your intestines that were found, they can be easily removed. And there you go. You've totally minimized your risk for developing cancers. If you didn't get the genetic test and you had no idea that your risk for colon cancer was elevated, the likelihood of you identifying a cancer early are going to be minimized, because you're probably not going to start getting colonoscopy screenings until 45. And by that time, especially if you have a genetic risk, you may have already had a problem or developed a cancer. So this is an incredibly powerful preventative tool, because it gives you insight into where you could eventually have a problem and allows you to fight that problem before it starts. And that's essentially why I say that your genetics are not your destiny, because you can outsmart them. You can literally outsmart them with something like a comprehensive genetic test.
And we're kind of on this level of epigenetics. We're getting into that area of how something beyond genetics can impact how that they're turned on and turned off.
Sure.
And that's a whole other show.
Yeah.
But I think maybe we should, this is a blood test. This is a blood draw.
No, it's a mouth swab.
Oh, it's a mouth swab. So very easy to do in the comfort of your own home.
Incredibly easy. Yes. The ability for clinical laboratories, which is the only types of laboratories we work with, they're all CAP/CLIA certified in the United States. The ability for them to extract DNA from saliva has really, really substantially, exploded. And so they make it as easy as possible for people to get this type of test done. And just like you said, you do it in less than 45 seconds in your own home. It's really fantastic.
So, with respect to your test in particular, do you have doctors on board that can recommend these testing? Is that sort of the way people get
Yes.
by having to go to the doctor and order the test?
Yes, exactly. So, interestingly, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, a lot of the tests that we hear about today are direct-to-consumer tests. Clearly, you don't need a doctor to be involved in those because they're not clinical tests. They're not deep, comprehensive tests that are analyzing your health risks. When it comes to clinical genetic testing, you do by law have to have a physician order this test for you. And so Panacea partners directly with physicians who are trained on genetic testing, and they review all of our orders. And if they have any specific questions for a patient that wants a genetic test, they will reach out to them directly. If not, they'll sign off on the order and patients will get their test without, again, ever having to leave their home or going to their doctor or begging their doctor to order this test for them. We totally bypass that barrier for people. That's sort of why we exist. We're bringing the convenience of a direct-to-consumer genetic test model with the quality and expertise of a medical test directly to people. We're fusing these two worlds together.
So when you receive your results, are they already interpreted for you, or do you have the opportunity to speak with someone who understands the results of your testing?
Yeah. So one of the biggest failures, I think, in genetic testing in general is the lack of involvement of experts. And genetic counselors are really, really, truly experts in understanding and interpreting the results of a genetic test. Your report that comes from Panacea essentially comes directly from our laboratory partners. And of course, the results are laid out in the report, but the report, to be honest with you, is not really consumer friendly. It's really geared towards an expert understanding it, which is exactly why every single test with Panacea comes with a free hour with a genetic counselor. And the genetic counselor will take that report, they'll dissect it for you, they'll explain to you what your results mean and what they don't mean and what you can do about it. And they'll even summarize the whole visit in a beautiful, nice visit note for you. So you can take that and keep that for yourself and share it with your doctor. Of course, you'll also get the report that comes to us from our laboratory partners, but you, in addition, get that hour with the counselor and that summary note from the counselor. So things can be a lot more digestible and you'll have an action plan on what to do next.
And then, so I still see an area of grayness here. You get the results, you understand the results, you know that you may be at risk for dementia. And you go to your home practitioner and you say, here are my results. This is what, and I would like to do. Don't they also have to be on board with this type of testing?
So what's interesting is what we've discovered actually throughout the evolution of Panacea is physicians in general, 9 out of 10 physicians really understand the value of genetic testing. And they understand its preventative powers. And they actually, when presented with a report, for example, you have an increased risk of breast cancer, colon cancer, Alzheimer's, what have you, the doctor will sort of say, "Oh, you have a genetic risk for this. I know what to do in order to reduce your risk. I know the screenings that are involved. I know what blood tests you can get." So they understand what to do in order to sort of implement a targeted health plan, but they don't necessarily have the piece before that figured out, which is what type of genetic test should I order for this patient? Where do I order this genetic test for this patient? What kinds of genes should I include in this test? They don't necessarily have a good grasp on that. They don't have the training on that piece, which is the piece that we already handle, right? We know the type of test that should be ordered for almost everyone. We know the experts that should be involved. We know the laboratories that are quality clinical laboratories that are reliable that people should go to. And so we handle the piece for the doctor that they're not that comfortable with. But the piece after is what they're experts at. They understand how to handle and minimize risks when those risks are presented to them. And so in most cases, the patient's going to take this lab result. They're going to take the genetic counseling summary to the doctor, and they're going to give it to the doctor, and the doctor's going to say, okay, this is interesting. Maybe we can do something with this. So we don't find that a lot of doctors are rejecting this information when their patients bring it to them. In fact, they're very interested and they're curious about it. And they're almost relieved that they didn't have to do the part before.
Excellent. That's good. That is good to know. It really is good to know. The last piece of the puzzle, we've got the mechanics down and we've got the interpretation down, is the actual fear that many of us would have in receiving those results. Mm-hmm. Some people to the point where they would not want to get the testing done.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that is very, very real. It's something that I deal with myself. Sometimes the thought is, what I don't know won't hurt me. So how do you respond to that area of testing, that fear space that tests like this can initiate?
Yeah, I think fear is a very natural feeling when it comes to stuff like this. I think the reason why that fear is so common is because the majority of people don't understand that something can actually be done with your results to reduce the likelihood of you being impacted by the risk that's carried in your genes. Most people I speak to say, why would I want to know this is written in stone. This is my DNA. These are my genes. And that's just a complete, that's just a fallacy. You have genes, obviously, that are carrying instruction for your body, but it is not written in stone. The risk that your gene might carry may at some point increase your risk for developing a problem, and it may never increase your risk or cause this problem to happen. So this is really a risk assessment. It is not a death sentence. It is not a reading of what is certain to happen in your future. And again, the best part of this is that you can take this information, you can take this risk assessment, and you can change your behaviors to reduce the likelihood that the risk carried in your genes is going to cause a problem for you. And that's why genetic testing is so powerful, because the information that comes off of it is useful and can help you create a very targeted action plan to really reduce your risk for ever developing this problem. Most people don't know that piece. Most people think it's just this is in your genes, good luck, have a great life, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't work like that. The value of this test is in its preventative power, right? And so I think when you explain that to people, and when people realize, oh, this can actually help me, not scare me, and not hurt me, it completely changes somebody's perspective on this test. It's just a matter of educating people on what the reality is.
I would imagine this may be a stupid thing to say, but nobody's test comes back perfect. We all have to be at risk for something, I would think.
So what's very interesting is because we choose to only report on things that have been found in your DNA that are actionable and that our scientific understanding is pretty thorough about, you will be surprised. There are some people whose reports are completely blank, which is really the best case scenario, right? You would hope to receive a very boring result when it comes to this type of testing. And in fact, many people will have no identifiable mutations known by science to cause an increased risk for a problem. You'd be surprised. And so a lot of people walk away from this type of test with a sense of peace, because they realize, okay, great. Well, at least now I don't have an elevated risk because of my genetics. Doesn't mean you're never going to develop a problem. Mm-hmm. It just means that your genes are not carrying any known mutations that are likely to increase your risk for It's for cancers and neurological diseases and cardiovascular diseases. The good news also is that we offer your raw data to you for free, which is basically every single little piece of genetic information that was sequenced by the machine. It comes in a very large file, not readable by humans, but it can be uploaded to all kinds of different software. And the value of that is you can continually keep up with medical changes because the software that's available everywhere, I think Prometheus is one of the most popular softwares on the internet today. You can upload your raw data there and it will show you all the latest reports and include all of the latest scientific discoveries that might pertain to your genetic makeup. And so this test and this raw data is valuable to you for the rest of your life. So the report that you get from Panacea will cover any actionable known medical mutations that could be medically actionable today. And that's why your raw data is valuable, because your raw data can be continually referenced for the rest of your life. So you don't ever lose out on any discoveries that could pertain to you.
And don't need to be retested at a later date.
That's right. That's exactly right. One test really, which is a comprehensive whole exome or whole genome test, is really going to be sufficient for you for the rest of your life, unless, of course, there's new technologies that come out, which likely will happen. But for now, getting a comprehensive genetic test will be valuable to you for the rest of your life.
So we've got everybody on board with this now, hyped up about wanting to get genetic testing done. The downside of the conversation is that you are only available in the United States at present.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. We really are looking to expand that at some point. We'd love to be available in every country in the world, but today, because of the complexities of healthcare regulations and a lot of red tape, we sort of have to limit ourselves to the American borders. But that likely will not be the case for long. But if you are a resident of the United States, you can just go to our website right now. We're offering a very special discount to Kathy's audience, which will save you 50% on the list price, which is insane. And you can get your test in just a few seconds.
Yeah, so the code for those of you who are within the borders of the United States for that is Health Hub 50. So if you went onto the website, you could enter in Health Hub 50 and receive, as Dahlia said, 50% off of her testing. The rest of us are either going to hope that soon the testing is available to us within our borders, or be creative in finding a way to get this test into our own hands.
Definitely.
But that's sort of left up to the individual and your creativity. I think it is a scary thing for some of us, especially some of us who have already had illnesses. But information is power, and I think that is, battling our own fears with this, with the understanding that we can have information that can, extend our lives, make our lives more lively, the one that we're living in, more healthful. I think it's a very important thing. And I think, what you've done is probably opened the doors to many, many other people wanting to do the same sort of thing, and it coming from out of the hospitals into our own hands, which is where we're seeing testing going now. Congratulations on all that you're doing. I truly hope that there is a time in the very near future where we can get our hands on your testing. And, to be perfectly frank, many other tests that aren't available to us here within the Canadian borders. But I think the information, regardless, that you're giving us is incredibly important. So I really do thank you for joining us today on the Health Hub.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It was really a pleasure, and I appreciate your support. And just like you said, our mission is to get this really valuable testing into the hands of more and more people, because it is now possible for you to take action and for you to be in the driver's seat of your health, along, of course, with the experts like doctors and counselors. But really, that's where we're trying to shift this paradigm, which is really just get more information into the hands of the person who cares most about their health, which is obviously you. You care most about your health.
And really start turning it to patient-led care. within our own health life. Dahlia, I don't know if you said your website, but maybe you could give us your website address so people can go take a look.
Absolutely. It's seekpanacea.com. So seek as in search, I'll spell it. It's SEEK, Panacea, PANACEA.com. And that's where you can purchase a test. You can find out a lot more information about genetic testing as well on our site. You can always reach out to us. There's a contact form that goes out to the team. And I'm more than happy to speak to anybody. If you want to ask me questions specifically, just send a question or send a contact form or reach out to our team at contact@seekpanacea, and I will be more than happy to connect with you if you'd like to.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Dahlia. Really appreciate it. And everybody, all the information will be put in the show notes, of course, so you can go there if you want to listen to the podcast. And I want to thank you all for joining us, and we will talk to you next week on the Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi, here on Radio Maria Canada.